Another closely watched Supreme Court decision this week that could signal big trouble for big labor down the road, as a 5-justice majority ruled that home health care workers in Illinois cannot be forced to pay dues to a union they don't want to join. We're back with Dan Henninger, Colin Levy, and Joe Rago. So, Colin, tell us about this Harris v. Quinn decision, which applied to home workers, which something like 500,000 of them are now belong to unions across the country.
Right, Paul. This was a case where the court basically said these workers, who many of them are working at home for their own children in many cases as personal assistants, cannot be coerced into joining the SEIU. And this was a very important decision because it basically said, you know, especially in public employee, public sector unions, it dealt with a case called Abood, which is an older case. What the court was doing here was saying you cannot be coerced into effectively lobbying the government.
Right,
when you have a public sector union, the government is on both sides of the table.
One of the things that a lot of analysts said was that the labor unions actually dodged a much broader decision here because the court did not overturn that earlier precedent and just narrowed this to home health care workers, not to all public employee unions. So they still can collect dues from most public workers. But is there a logic in this decision that suggests that down the road the court could broaden this to include all government employees?
Yes, that's exactly what happened here. And Justice Alito really wrote this opinion in a way that lays that out. He put Abood out as what he called an anomaly and a very questionable foundation that is not at all consistent with the court's general First Amendment jurisprudence. So I think he made clear that that could happen in the future. But again, Paul, this was a case that was notable, like many this term, for Justice Roberts seeming to find a narrower route rather than reaching the larger questions.
The Chief Justice John Roberts, Joe, and that is sort of the watchword of this term and of this Chief Justice, which is he prefers unanimity. So if he can get 9 justices, including the 4 liberals on board, for narrower decisions, he'll take it. A kind of incremental progress or a right decision on the law, even if it doesn't have larger legal implications. Or, this is really interesting, go as far as Justice Scalia would like to go, who has ended up this term writing concurrences that sound often like dissents.
Right. In 3 cases this term, he concurred with the majority, but in a very angry way. You know, I agree with the result you've reached, but I'm furious about it. It's interesting. 65% of the cases this term were unanimous. That's the highest percentage since the 1940s.
Wow. So how do you read Chief Justice Roberts'
well, I think, Paul,
method here?
Well, I'll tell you, this is just an opinion, but I think Justice Roberts is concerned about the reputation of the court in a political world that we now occupy, where there is so much polarization that Congress's reputation is severely damaged, as is the president's.
So he doesn't want the Supreme Court to get a reputation for being political. He wants it to the public to think, to the court to maintain its authority as a legal arbiter.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Justice Scalia is making the counter-argument, as he said explicitly, we are shirking our duty, quote unquote, by not pointing out constitutional error. That's why Justice Scalia is so furious. He thinks that Justice Roberts is simply accommodating the other side, regardless of what the Constitution requires.
Well, Colin, I know
that's the bit that, sorry, I was just going to say, to elaborate on Dan, that's the big irony here. The effort to keep the court from seeming political or being a political hot button ends up with Justice Roberts often choosing these narrow routes that achieve a policy outcome but don't seem to be based deeply in the Constitution.
Well, Colin, give us an example here. Where's a case where that happened, where you think Scalia was right and Roberts really settled for a half a loaf that he shouldn't have?
Well, I think Noel Canning is a case like that. This was obviously a decision that was unanimous, that struck down the administration's illegal recess appointments. Everyone agreed that those recess appointments were illegal, but this was clearly a decision that sort of made up, you know, a line out of thin air.
But here, Colin, nonetheless, Roberts got 9-0 rebuke of the President of the United States, and included in that rebuke 2 of the appointees that this president made. Isn't that actually a very significant statement on the law?
Again, yes, it's a significant statement on the law, but it's more a rebuke to the Obama administration than it actually is a revitalization of the Constitution, which is what the Supreme Court's supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be reading the text and telling us what it means. And I'm not sure that's only what they were doing here. They came up with 3 days to 10 days as an okay time for a recess appointment, and no one really knows where they got that. I'm not sure that's helpful in any way.
All right, we've got Colin Levy, the Wall Street Journal's originalist interpreter of the Constitution. All right, when we come back, immigration reform collapses and the blame game begins. So which side will pay the bigger price in the midterm elections and 2016?